facts of history have a way of fading and altering over time. What we think we know about the past may or may not be accurate. People and places and their significance can be forgotten as well. Join me, historian Melinda Holloway, as we dig beneath the surface of our understanding of the past and maybe even discover some new facts along the way on Uncovering History with Melinda. We often think about the early European settlers of America during the Thanksgiving holidays. But as we discovered in Part 1, Plymouth Colony was not even close to being the first of the European settlements in the present United States. Traditional American history has focused on our British past when regarding early European settlements, almost to the exclusion of other histories. We discovered that the first European settlement in what is now the United States was settled by the Spanish near Pensacola, Florida. The settlement was called Ochuse. It lasted 2 years. Europe in the mid-1500s was in great turmoil due to the Protestant Reformation taking place there. This prompted one group of French Lutheran Protestants called Huguenots to seek refuge in America. They first made a scouting expedition to find sites for settlements and established a fort near present-day Parris Island, South Carolina, called Charles Fort in 1562. It was abandoned within the year. 2 years later, the Huguenots formed a colony near present-day Jacksonville, Florida, called Fort Caroline. The location of this settlement came into conflict with the Spanish, who attacked the settlement and massacred all French Huguenots. The Spanish later reclaimed the 2 French settlements for themselves. What is known as the first permanent European settlement in North America was actually begun as a staging ground to attack the French settlement of Fort Caroline. After the Spanish rid themselves of the French Huguenots, they used St. Augustine as a supply depot, and then later it developed into a more formalized colony. As the Spanish tried to increase their presence in North America, they established forts among Native American villages in what is now South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. The largest of these outposts was Hawata, near present-day Morganton, North Carolina. It wasn't long before relations with the native peoples deteriorated and the local tribes killed the Spanish soldiers and burned the forts. It would be 13 more years before there were any new efforts made to establish another European settlement in America. The next attempt would be made by the English in 1585. Sir Walter Raleigh acquired a charter from Queen Elizabeth to settle any non-Christian lands. So he sent an expedition to found the first English colony in America. A fleet of ships set sail from England led by Richard Grenville, who was known for his temper and his penchant for piracy. They landed on Roanoke Island within the outer banks of present-day North Carolina. But conflicts among Grenville and the governor of the new colony, Ralph Lane, and Grenville's excessive use of force with the native peoples would doom this first colony. However, it was decided to leave a contingency of 15 soldiers on the island to maintain an English presence there. Another attempt was made 2 years later by John White, who was to be the new governor of the city of Raleigh. More than 100 settlers, including his pregnant daughter and son-in-law, were originally bound for the Chesapeake Bay instead of Roanoke because of the soured relations with the natives. But after going first to Roanoke to bring supplies to the soldiers there, the flagship pilot insisted that the settlers stay at Roanoke. It did not start well for these new colonists. The fort and homes from the previous colony were dismantled and overgrown. There were no signs of the soldiers except for one human skeleton. When one man headed to the shore to gather crabs, he was shot with arrows and killed by the native people. Continued interactions with the local native tribes to try and establish peace proved futile. Even in this desperate situation, a bright moment was when White's daughter gave birth there on August 18, 1587. The baby girl was named Virginia because she was born in the new English colony named after Elizabeth the Virgin Queen. As the fleet was leaving to go back to England, The colonists decided they would move 50 miles north and settle there. They encouraged White to go back with the fleet and get more help and supplies. Begrudgingly, White left for England, leaving his daughter and 9-day-old grandchild. Unfortunately, after returning to England, many things happened to delay his return to the colony, none the least of which was war with Spain and an attack on England by the Spanish Armada. When he finally got permission to sail back, it had been 3 years since he had been in the colony. Delays again prevented the fleet from going directly to the colony, but when they did arrive, no one was found. The settlement had a palisade and objects had been taken away. White remembered they wanted to relocate, so he assumed that is what happened. The word Croatoan was carved on the palisade, not an agreed-upon duress inscription, which meant that they probably went peaceably to an island of the same name. While it is still not known for sure what happened to the Roanoke colonists, there is some evidence to show that some settlers may have moved out to Hatteras Island to wait for John White, while others moved 50 miles inland to a place in present-day Bertie County. But as of now, there is still no definitive proof about what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. After 2 failed attempts by Queen Elizabeth to found an English colony in America, 20 years later, the new monarch, King James I, ending the privateering war with Spain, chartered the Virginia Company in 1606. This company sought investors to fund a commercial venture in the name of the Crown, to found settlements for England, seek a navigable passage through the continent to the Orient, and convert the native people to the Anglican religion. The land of Virginia stretched from present-day North Carolina all the way to Maine. Geographically, the Virginia Company was divided into 2. The London Company would be in the southern portion of Virginia, and the Plymouth Company could settle in the north of Virginia. The territories of the 2 companies overlapped in the middle of Virginia. Each company was to found its own colonies and conduct its own commercial trade, and the Crown would get a portion of any profits. In 1607, both companies sent out their first expeditions of adventurers. The London Company adventurers landed on the mainland just inside the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and founded the colony of Jamestown. The Plymouth Company set out a few weeks later and landed near the mouth of the Kennebunk River in what is now Maine and settled Popham Colony. Both colonies struggled during the first winter with death and leadership problems. The first president of Popham Colony, George Popham, died the first winter. In contrast, over 50 settlers died in Jamestown during their first winter. The settlers at Popham Colony began building a star fort called Fort St. George. Another goal and success of Popham Colony was to use the abundant timber in North America to build ships for England, and they succeeded in building a small ship called a pinnace. They named it the Virginia. It was originally intended to explore the rivers and inland areas, but after the death of George Popham and more deaths of settlers at the hands of the native Abenaki, the colony abandoned its efforts within 14 months of arrival. They used the Virginia to sail back to England. Back in Jamestown, in addition to the death of many colonists during the first winter, they were also plagued by power struggles. There were 3 presidents in the first year before Captain John Smith became its imposing leader. He governed with a dictatorial style of leadership and had several conflicts with the strong indigenous nation of the Powhatans. During his role as president, Smith was burned severely by gunpowder and left the colony for England in the fall of 1609, never to return. Shortly after Smith's departure, the colony faced its most difficult trial yet, the starving time. This was due to poor relations that Smith had developed with the Powhatans, which caused siege warfare with the colonists over the winter. George Percy, a leader in Jamestown, wrote, "Indians killed as fast outside the fort as famine and pestilence did within." The colony almost collapsed by the spring of 1610, when the survivors boarded ships and were ready to set sail. when a supply ship came carrying a new military governor with a new charter for the colony. His name was Lord Delaware. By 1619, they began to find a successful industry by raising tobacco. The tobacco required much land and much labor. Jamestown began acquiring indentured servants, both European and African, some voluntary, some involuntary. Over the next decades, Jamestown would experience rebellion, Indian attacks, power struggles, and other problems. But it endured as Virginia's capital, having its first meeting of the House of Burgesses in July 1619. The seat of government would continue at Jamestown until the end of the century, when at the request of the newly founded College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, the House of Burgesses was moved there in 1699. Jamestown would continue for a time only as a port for commerce. It gradually fell into ruin. In the 14 years since the Virginia Company began its attempt to make settlements in North America, a group of Puritan separatists were moving from place to place in England, eventually settling in Holland, to stay where they could worship according to their own beliefs instead of being forced to worship in the Church of England. But after 12 years in Holland, several factors convinced them that they should find a place away from Europe where they could worship freely. After many delays and double crosses by spies, shipmasters, and investors, they finally set sail in September 1620 from Plymouth, England. They were bound for the Hudson River in America, near present-day New York City. The voyage was fraught with storms, sickness, death, and conflicts with the seamen, but two events encouraged the passengers. One of the separatists fell overboard during a storm, but grabbed a rope and was pulled back on board. Plus, a baby was born during the voyage and was named Oceanus. After 2 months at sea, they finally landed at the tip of Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. Realizing that this was not their intended destination, they set sail again going south towards the Hudson River, but shoals and winds caused them to turn back. They reached America in November of 1620, not the most hospitable time to start a colony. In fact, the winter was so harsh that half of the original 100 passengers perished. By the next spring, the remaining settlers, with the help of the native Wampanoag, set to building structures and planting crops. The colony did survive, and they were also joined in nearby locations over the next decades by other Puritan groups.